Good evening, everyone. We are now recording. Welcome to week 8. So this week we're going to be exploring teacher as researcher and reflective practitioner. So as you can see on the slide, we're specifically going to be looking at reflective thinking and critical thinking. We're going to unpack the 4R framework. Is anyone familiar with the 4R framework? Is it something that the reflection framework? We're also going to have a look at collaborative reflection and also teacher as researcher and advocate. And as always, we shall finish up with some further discussion about our assessment task 2. So that's the general outline for this evening. All right, so we've mentioned this before, but being a reflective practitioner is a critical part of being an effective teacher. And this isn't just early childhood, of course, it's across the board, early childhood, primary, secondary, moving into my practice as well. I spend a great deal of time reflecting on my decisions about practice, on individual students and how I might be able to support them, what their needs might be. And this might include reflecting on their background and their situation as well, and their particular learning context. So reflection, it's the active, ongoing and carefully considered, careful consideration about your beliefs or any form of knowledge. Anyone else have any other particular definitions or insights into their thoughts about reflection? Not at this point. Remember, there's always the opportunity for you to type into the chat, and I'm very happy to read out your comments as well. So a great deal of your time throughout your postgraduate study and also your time as in your professional teaching practice will be spent reflecting. So this may also be part of your professional development plan as well. Reflective practice could be something that you want to include. In fact, I would be very surprised if you didn't include it as part of your action plan, because as well as developing an action plan, you're also going to have to reflect and evaluate the success of it. So I think that really needs to be part of it as well. It will be an important part of any action plan that you're wanting to implement. So it's about providing opportunities for you and quite possibly your colleagues as well to reflect on professional practice. So this would involve reflecting on what you read. It could be reflecting on your colleagues' perspectives and also how your thinking may have changed or, changes, not necessarily just changed, but it could have, slightly changed. So what's the word for that? What's the word I'm trying to think of? So this
evolved or developed.
Thank you so much, Jade. I appreciate that. Yeah, so it's not just about changing, it's about evolving and developing. Thank you very much, Jade. Thank you. You can come and do my job. Adjusting, yeah, Pamela, thank you. That's another one, another good word. So part of reflective practice, of course, includes critical thinking. And we're all very much aware of what critical thinking is. We've been doing a lot of it, no doubt, in some of you are just starting your postgraduate studies, and you'll be doing a lot of that across all of the units that you're going to be involved in. So reflective thinking, as opposed to critical thinking, it addresses practical problems. So it's more immediate. This is around posing questions to more practical problems. So practical problems in our day-to-day practice as teachers. So critical thinking, on the other hand, it's more deeper reflection, and it involves looking objectively at a given situation. So it's a learned skill. I believe it's a learned skill. Would anyone else agree? What are your thoughts? I think critical thinking is a learned skill. Yeah, many educators require direct instruction in the process involved in critical thinking. And also it involves practice and perseverance to keep developing the skills as well. So if you're looking at, as part of your action plan, to develop your communities of inquiry, and part of that no doubt will be critical thinking, you may need to think about if your colleagues, especially if you're a team leader or in your workplace, you might need to think about how you might scaffold that learning, that critical reflection. It might involve a professional development, or it might involve some reading. It might involve looking possibly at some of the resources that we've used in the unit around critical thinking, and to possibly share those with some of your colleagues. So some people actually find critical thinking a little bit difficult, I think, because it requires you to look and think beyond what you already know. So looking at many different perspectives. And so this involves thinking about and applying lots of different layers that are needed for rich questioning and inquiry. So critical thinking is often about posing questions as well as answering them. That's a big part of it. So additional layers of critical thinking, it may take the form of looking at different perspectives to that of your own, looking at scholarly literature and research, and particular theories that are relevant to your daily work. It might also involve considerations of broader social and political influences. So, this might include something like societal expectations. So the expectations of parents as well, the expectations of the hierarchy in your school. It might include considerations of stereotypes, of our biases and the beliefs that we hold that influence bias. And of course, it will no doubt involve curriculum and policy changes as well. So when we're thinking about critical reflection, we really need to think about questions. We need to ask ourselves important questions, and that might involve what assumptions that you make. It might also involve consideration of what is valued in the particular situation that you are working on or towards. So your particular research question in our case. So you would also need to think about what is not valued. Again, we're talking about children's voice, about power relationships that we've discussed in the previous weeks. So the question would be, who is made powerful? And of course, who is not powerful. So these are all the considerations that you would be thinking about in terms of developing your action plan and really reflecting critically on your context. So Witten et al., I think this is a really good article. I'm into triggers. He believes that reflection consists of three basic elements. And so the first one is a trigger. So sometimes critical reflection or change processes, it actually takes a particular trigger or a direct experience or an observation in your learning environment or something that you read from key theorists or recent research. It could even be something that parents have commented on, or it could be something directly related to the children. But often critical reflection eventuates because of a particular trigger. So also we need to consider the trigger in terms of beliefs, values, or knowledge. So this involves, considering that trigger and questioning your own practice. So thinking about how you feel about that particular trigger. And of course, that will be thinking about your beliefs and values. As I said, that will be a big part of your critical reflection. And importantly, it will involve the contemplation of future practice. So understandings and knowledge, and of course, in the case of this particular assessment task, considerations about further professional learning and professional practice. So it's thinking about how you relate to wider issues, how you relate them to more local issues. So we're thinking about macro to micro and vice versa. So this is actually where you are with your second assessment task at the moment. You're contemplating future practice, understandings, and new knowledge. So you've actually had a trigger, and the trigger was your research question, and you've considered that trigger, and now you're contemplating your future practice that you're going to work towards. Any questions so far? Just checking the chat. So it's all about developing that new knowledge and understanding. So the knowledge and understanding that you've gained through doing your literature review, doing your curriculum analysis, looking at the findings that you've, the conclusions and findings that you've come to. And then in the final part of your first assessment task, you would have focused on the implications. So implications for the profession, and most importantly, moving into your action plan, the implications for your professional practice. So on the slide, you can see some statements. There's some statements and some questions. I want you to look at these statements and questions, have a read through them, and I'm actually going to ask you to share your responses in a small group. We're going to do some breakout groups. We haven't done that before. So I'm going to divide you into groups. And so what I suggest you do is with your phone, you might want to take a screenshot, or you can look at the PowerPoint slides and use those. I actually find taking a shot with your phone of the screen is probably the easiest thing to do. So I'm going to give you a moment to read through these statements and think about how you might respond to those questions. So this is all about our assumptions, our beliefs about reflection. Those of you who are watching the recording, you can go through the statements and also respond to the questions as well. So I'm going to give you, a few moments. It's what we would refer to as think, pair, share. I'm sure you use it often in your learning environments, where you pose your students a question, you put them into pairs or small groups, and then you call them back so that they can share with the whole group. It's a really great strategy because it allows you to think carefully about it, about the issue or the question, and then to have the confidence to discuss it with your peers or your colleagues, and then come back and be prepared to share your perspectives after sharing and discussing everyone else's insights as well. So I'm going to give you a bit of time. I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, so we're back from breakout groups. Let's focus on that final question there. So you would have all had probably, I'm assuming, different perspectives when it comes to reflection. But what did your responses reveal about your beliefs and assumptions in relation to reflective practice? Any thoughts?
Fiona and I agreed on whether we just disagreed or agreed. So I think we're on the same page. Is that right, Fiona?
Sorry, yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and I think we both have a really heavy commitment to reflective practice. It's really just the getting it down on paper a lot of the time. Like a lot of it is reflection in action. And sometimes it gets to reflection for action.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is, as we go, and it's finding the time to actually record it. But I do know that recording it is really important because that's what you go back to sort of see what the further development is.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And we didn't think it was indulgent. We just thought it was absolutely necessary, but time, we can be very time poor. So that's a bit of a challenge. And that was in the videos as well.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent. So I guess we can have strong beliefs about reflective practice, but it's all about how we actually make it happen, isn't it? And I think having a commitment to it and good leadership would involve making sure educators have time for reflective practice so that it's actually built in to that it's timetabled. So Jade is saying that everyone in our group agreed that reflective practice is critical for improving practice and should be a continual process for all educators, new and experienced. Yeah. And I think in terms of our beginning teachers who, for many of you guys as experienced teachers, I think we really need to model the reflective practice and also show that you have a commitment to it for our beginning teachers. It's really important. Okay, so we're going to
Angela, can I just challenge your, not too much, I don't want to be
no, please. I love challenging.
Just challenge your thoughts or the group's thoughts about that. And one of the things that I shared with our group, and I guess you raised a point about beginning teachers there. First of all, I don't think teachers reflect, and definitely not well enough, because of time constraints, and someone mentioned that we just bulldoze through one unit of work and then, oh, look out, it's time to go on to the next unit of work, and we don't effectively do it.
Yeah.
But I also don't think that reflective practice is something that new staff should be doing, because it's very hard for us to reflect on what we're doing. I think it's much more valuable if someone else gives us that feedback, because someone else can see what we're doing. Sometimes we have a look at ourselves through rose-colored glasses when we're reflecting. And so I'd hate to think that encouraging new and beginning teachers to reflect because they don't necessarily know what they don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point, a very good point. But I think reflective practice can take so many forms, and it doesn't necessarily have to be on your own practice. So I think for beginning teachers, like I teach in the Stepping In group. So that's first years. A lot of them straight out of high school, pre-service teachers. They'll be going on, some of them will be going on their placement next semester and some the following semester. But reflection is also about reflecting on other teachers' practices as well, which I think is really important. So, you know, and it's also reflecting on your students as well, and looking at their needs and reflecting on your own beliefs as well, and how they influence your practice. So reflecting on how biased you might be in a particular situation. But Cameron, I completely agree. We have to be very careful about the pressures that we put on our beginning teachers, and to make sure that they have those supports and that they're mentored, and have those opportunities to observe lots of different teachers' practices as well. Because as we know, you can go to university and you can learn lots and you can go on placement, but when you actually come and become a teacher, that's when you really you know, need all of that practice. So we've got the concept of walkers was really interesting. The name was interesting too. Oh, we're talking about peer reflection, is that right?
Yeah, when they had the 4 teachers going into classrooms and getting observing, I thought it was interesting. Like, I just thought the name Walkers was interesting.
It's a bit Game of Thrones.
It is a bit.
And what's Warren saying? Reflections are only a part of the whole in improving practices and quality. It's important, but not the only measurement of quality. Excellent. Would you like to expand on that, Warren?
I can expand it. That's kind of part of the other paper that I'm doing. But yeah, critical reflections and self-evaluation and self-assessment tools are all there, and they help improve practice. But there's a lot of things, like Cameron says as well. There's other teachers' assessments as well, your mentors, your leadership group. You're going against what, in my situation, we use the NQF and ELF, and you go and you measure yourself against that as well. So there's just multiple ways to improve practice, and reflection's part of it, but there's so many other areas and elements that add to it.
Definitely. And I think part of reflecting is, you know, knowing how to do it and do it well. And this is something, again, moving back to the Stepping In, our first years, we're doing a lot of work this semester about frameworks for reflecting. And the one that we use is the 4R framework. So reflecting on experience through drawing on current understandings. So to think deeply and purposely about what can be learnt from a particular experience. So this could be reflecting just on your daily practice, for example. It doesn't have to involve, you know, just, it could be incidental things. I think, as Tiffany said, or Jade, it could just be things in the moment, and it may not even be with a colleague. It may just be yourself, and often the process, the framework and the stages that I'm going to talk you through, a lot of you will just do that in your head as a matter of purpose. But as a beginning teachers, they really need to have that framework to follow. So I just want to go through it with you because I think this is a really good framework. A lot of reflection frameworks can be really complex, but this one is quite straightforward. Some of you may be familiar with it, I'm sure. So the purpose of any kind of academic or professional reflection is to transform your teaching practice. That's the basis of it. And in the same way, whether it's practice of teaching or the practices of your profession. So it could be whole school reflection as well. So the 4 R's: reporting, relating, reasoning, and reconstruction. So they involve learning from your experiences and then connecting to some extent to theory with practice as well. So understanding these 4 dimensions, it can really help you become aware of your assumptions and preconceived ideas. It can help you with problem solving in your learning environment. And most importantly, it's the basis for planning future actions. So this could be, future actions could be research or decisions or setting goals around professional practice. And of course, this may lead in some way to professional development as well, but it's all basically about professional learning, isn't it? Would you agree? You know, reflective practice, it's all part of professional learning. So the first one, reporting and responding, as you can see on the slide, it's about reporting what happened or what the issue or incident involved. So, you know, the critical incident or the issue that you may be wondering about or concerned about. And it's about considering why it's relevant, and then responding to that particular incident by making observations, expressing your opinion, and it often involves asking questions. So part of reflecting is asking questions to answer questions. So this kind of reflection, it should be the basis of our teaching and interactions with colleagues and with parents. So in your learning environment, that first one, responding and reporting and responding. So the second one, relating, that involves relating or making a connection between the incident or the issue and your own prior skills, your prior professional experience, or your prior knowledge. So you might be asking questions like, you know, have I seen this before? Were the conditions the same or different? Do I have the skills and knowledge to deal with this? So if we think about it again, this is the process that you're going through with assessment task 2, isn't it? You know, relating or making a connection between the incident or issue and your own skills, your professional experience, and your knowledge. You know, in developing your research question, you would have identified, like the first R, you would have identified a particular incident, and then relating to it, you would have thought about your learning environment or possibly your future learning environment. And now you'll be reflecting on the skills and knowledge that you have to help you move forward. You understand where I'm at? Yeah. And so reasoning, this one involves, you know, all of those significant factors that underlie the incident or issue. And there can be a lot of those. So, you know, as in teaching, there are so many layers. All of our individual students, you know, they're all so diverse with their personalities, their family backgrounds, so many different things that we need to consider in our environment, you know, as well as things like the professional standards. So our teaching and learning environments, they have so many different levels. So it's also about explaining and showing why it's important to have an understanding of the incident or issue. So that's, I guess, going back to your rationale that you'll be thinking about for your both for assessment task 1 and assessment task 2. And then, of course, with all critical reflection, we're referring to relevant theory and literature to support your reasoning. Again, you'll be doing this in your second assessment task as well. And this, it will involve considering different perspectives. There's questions down here to support it. How would a knowledgeable person perceive or handle the particular situation? You also might want to consider when you are developing your professional development plan, what are the ethics involved? How will it impact individuals, all the stakeholders in your environment? If you're starting to think about implementing change, there's going to be impacts. And we talked about that last week, and especially looking at the clips of the teacher with the implementing the early years learning framework. I think that was a really good example. We talked about resilience and thinking about all the stakeholders, but ethics is another level on top of that as well. So you would be referring to the Early Childhood Australia Code of Ethics, possibly, if you wanted to mention that and cite that as well. So as well as theory, you would be referring to policy documents and ethical documents as well in your assessment task 2. So, when we really think about this level of reflection, it involves a little bit of abstract thinking, really. So where you're able to draw conclusions and take a personal position based on critical evidence, so theoretical evidence. So, in some ways in our learning environments, when you are making change, you really need to think out of the box, and you've got so much to consider, all the different stakeholders, and making sure that you consider the diversity of everyone in your context as well. Again, diversity is something that I think you need to be considering in any action plan that you're making. So reframing or reconstructing. So this is all about those future practices or understandings. So you could consider, how would I deal with this next time? What might work and why? Are there different options? You could be considering what might happen if I do this. So you might have lots of different considerations. And sometimes we're not going to know how things turn out until we try it as well. So there's always an element of risk involved, isn't there, in any changes that we make? So, are my ideas supported by theory? So this is where you're going to be referring back to your literature review, and you're comparing and contrasting an analysis of the curriculum documents as well. And of course, can I make changes to benefit others? So again, you'll be thinking about, the children and also their families as well, depending what you're thinking about. They're going to be central to any decisions. So making sure that you're always coming back to the children and students in your learning environment. So in terms of evaluating your action plan, or obviously you can't evaluate it until you've actually implemented it, but I'd like you to consider how and you might evaluate it, or at least the importance of evaluating it. And so these are some of the questions that you again might think about in that evaluation as well. So so part of your action plan may actually involve reflecting critically. And if you want to, you could use a specific framework like the 4 R's to base that on as well. Just an idea. I'm not saying that you have to. It's just something, if it's relevant to your context or to your particular research question or issue. So Bredesen 2002, one of our readings for the week, suggests that reflective practice is more likely to lead to change when it's undertaken collectively. So by deconstructing or pulling apart experiences and critically examining all of the aspects of them, educators can gather, a wealth of information to guide their decisions. So decisions about what could be changed, what could be repeated, what could be extended, what could be adapted. And this is done best when you're learning together with colleagues, when all stakeholders are represented. So by collaborating, you're bringing together diverse knowledge, all different experiences, perspective, views, attitudes, and I would add to that beliefs and understandings as well. So by collaborating, it really is a way to experiment with new ideas. So brainstorming, I guess. So brainstorming and experimenting with ways of teaching, ways of caring. And I think it's also about continually being motivated in your workplace, in your learning context. And of course, again, all coming back to the children and students, so making a positive difference to their learning and well-being as well. So it's not all just about learning, is it? So I want to actually get you to think about how you currently engage in reflective practice in your current environment. And when I say environment, it doesn't, if you're not working as a teacher, it doesn't have to be in your classroom or your learning context. It could be with your other work colleagues, depending on where you work. But have a think about it. And I want you to, I guess, focus on some of the challenges that you might have. But also you might actually have some strategies that you use to help with your reflection in your learning environment or workplace. Feel free to type in the chat if you want to, or verbalize. I'll give you a moment to have a think about it. Same for those watching the recording. Because again, this is, very relevant to your second assessment task. You may need to rethink your reflective practices in your learning environment or your future learning environment. How you might need to change or adapt them, or how they might be helpful in achieving your goals. So we've got here developing performance framework conversations. Yeah. Did you want to elaborate on that, Cameron?
Yeah, sure, because I'm rattling off a couple of other ones there. So I'm in a position as a school leader, I guess. And so one of the things that I do regularly with my staff is developing performance framework conversations, or some people in some schools might call them APDPs, or performance plans, those types of things. So for me, in terms of a time frame with staff, they're ongoing, and I might meet with you, Angela, today, and then we'll set a date to review that in X amount of days or weeks. And that looks different for all of the staff, but it's about them reflecting on their practices and how they want to become better. A couple of other things that we do at our staff is classroom observations from school leaders, and we have mentor teachers who work with our beginning teachers, providing feedback and observations. Like you mentioned before about beginning teachers, we have our beginning teachers who go and observe other teachers and reflect on their practices. I'm pretty fortunate that what we also do, and I talked about how we bulldoze through without reflecting before, but within our units, we have what we call as a pause and prompt, where our staff actually stop halfway through and go back to their planning and sit down with their head of curriculum and say, hey, are we on the right track here? So that's another way in which they reflect on where they're going to make sure that they don't get to the end and realise that they've sort of missed a turn along the way. So they're just a couple of things that happen within our school setting anyway.
No, excellent. Really good. So you've actually got structures and, strategies in place to make it happen.
Yeah, and a lot of templates for our meetings as well, with predefined questions, so that we're not turning up and putting teachers on the spot, so they've had time to think about their answers beforehand. So I might meet with Warren and we're going to talk about all the IEALD kids in his class, and he knows that beforehand, and we want to know how they're progressing and how their attendance is and what we can do to improve that. So already know that before we turn up, and have that conversation on that date when we get there, and that might happen in week 5 every term, whatever it is when we schedule those things, and then we do it again week 5 next term.
Yeah, excellent. Oh, very good. Yeah, thanks for that, Cameron. Yeah, Fiona says that coming into a new workplace and working part-time, she's finding that reflection is quite difficult at the moment. Yeah, it often is. And you can't type. Pamela says, I think it's really is something that should be collectively developed in order to have the buy-in of the team. Yeah, that's a very good point, Pamela. Tiffany meets weekly with her peers to discuss practice, also video coaching with educators as well. So that would be based on your goals. Is that right, Tiffany? Based on set goals? Yeah. Learning circles with educators. Could you elaborate on that, Tiffany?
Yeah, so educators, like there might be a topic that is suggested, and people can opt into a learning circle to talk about, what they know about it. And there might be there'll be someone who's facilitating it who might have access to research or an article that people might have read prior to coming to the circle, and then kind of discussing what the impact of that information is and how they might change their practice. And we try and do that with a facilitator that there's one who's experienced and there's one who's like a new graduate. And I think the really good thing about new graduates is that they come with the recent knowledge, and they have got a lot to offer. And I think we just always assume that because people have been there longer, they know more. And in fact, we need to kind of flip it sometimes and think about what can we learn from the new graduate around more contemporary perspectives. So that's why it's important for the facilitators to be both new and experienced.
I'll pass that on to my first years.
Okay, good.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting. So Warren says, as an educational leader, I use the reflections. Sorry, I'm a bit trigger happy this evening. I use the reflections from the educators to direct my practice. My reflection practice extends from the strategies that I developed from the reflections and the feedback reflection from educators. So there's a double learning theory happening. Yeah, so it's a cycle. Yeah, a double cycle.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't articulated very well. I just got lost in my own.
I get what you mean, though. I get what you mean.
Yeah, so there's lots of reflections happening.
Yes, yeah. And so it's reflection and evaluation, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So Yifang organizes the open class, and after class, the observer can communicate with the teacher. Excellent. And Jade is involved in IEP meetings, which incorporate collaborative reflection between the class teacher, inclusive education teachers, the student, family, and other specialists involved in the student's life. So to set goals and improve teaching practices and resources for the student. Excellent. Yeah. So there's a lot of stakeholders involved there, Jade. And so all considering those diverse needs of the students. So in Sharon's workplace, we reflect in several different ways. We meet as a teaching team to discuss practice, curriculum, etc., but also as a whole school. At the whole school level, we have set questions to discuss in a different team. So kind of similar to what Cameron does. So those questions are set by a member of the executive team. The current questions I see what you mean. The current questions we're talking through is about student feedback. It's great to hear from a range of different colleagues than those that you teach with. That's great. So, really networking even further. Is that what you mean, Sharon? Yeah.
Yes, it is. It's within the same school site.
Yeah.
But one team could have a prep teacher and a grade 10 English teacher. But again, it's reflecting on how the practice is the same, how it's different, what's good, what works, what doesn't, why. It's just that getting that pool of knowledge, but it's all reflective on one topic or question. It's really good. A bit daunting at first, but it's good now. I'm used to it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you do say that, because I think reflective practice, as I said before, it is a skill, and you do need the space and the people around you to help you become confident. And it's about people being supportive as well, isn't it? Yeah, that's great. So Jade says critical reflection can be so much richer when done in collaboration with others who bring all of their knowledge and experience. Yeah. Is there buy-in when the reflective questions are imposed? I can see pros and cons. Interesting. Tiffany, would you like, Sharon, did you want to respond to that? Tiffany was asking about the set questions.
Yeah, I can see the point, but I must admit the culture at our workplace is very much that everyone buys in. The average team has got sort of 8 to 10 people. So if it is a topic you don't particularly feel strongly about or can't be bothered to discuss, there's usually somebody that will bring something to the discussion. But to be honest, even just listening, even if you don't buy into the topic, listening to what others are saying does make you reflect on your own practice, even if you don't feel you contribute to the meeting at the time. So yeah, to answer your question, Tiffany, yes, there is buy-in, or certainly within the team I'm in, there is buy-in, but I can see examples where there wouldn't necessarily be buy-in, but it is so good to watch other teachers and learn from other teachers. So yeah, I think if there's not buy-in, they need to question whether they're in the right career or not, to be honest.
Yeah, so it's very much about the culture that is developed in the school. And Sonia says, thanks very much for that. Sonia says we have a regular meeting, so discuss observations and challenges, look and plan for the ways in solving it as a team. Yeah, everything is so much easier when if any issues, if you have people to brainstorm with and to discuss it, it makes it less challenging or less frightening, because in some ways those can be quite scary, having to deal with things by yourself, especially if they involve things like parent concerns and things like that. I think having that assistance or another perspective there is really important. So yeah, just moving on from that, so the critically reflective practices, so it supports a teacher's deep understanding of effective pedagogies, and what age appropriate pedagogies actually look like in different environments, what practices and strategies different teachers are using, how they consider the diversity of individual students, so those pedagogical approaches that support all students, differentiating. So learning walks, they can have a very positive effect on a teacher's capacity to support individual students. So you know, again, that teamwork and establishing that culture. So it, as it says on the slide, learning walks or peer feedback can support professional discussions. It can be part of collaborative planning, ongoing professional learning. I would definitely consider learning walks as part of professional learning. You know, really allowing teachers to identify their strengths, to make connections with each other about different pedagogical beliefs and philosophies. And I guess to identify what they might want to change in their teaching practice and why. So again, as Cameron said before, you know, you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes by seeing other people practicing, there can be some nice light bulb moments. There's even a light bulb there. Any experience with learning walks or peer observation and feedback? Do we do any of that in your school? Cameron, it sounds like you do.
Interestingly, we don't do learning walks, and I'll tell you why. Just because of the, and now, did I get it right? Is it Lynn Sharrett who publicises the learning walks? I'm not really sure, but I talk to my staff about what I perceive as a bit of the rudeness of learning walks, where you'll have a bunch of people come into the class, make some observations. I'll be stereotypical and say with a clipboard, and then walk out and talk about what they've seen. Whereas we find it a little bit more personable to actually have a conversation with the classroom teacher in the classroom environment about what's going on there. So I know some schools do learning walks, but within our school, we choose not to. But like Sharon talked about, we've got a really good culture within our school. So it's very open in being able to come in and have a conversation with a staff member about what's going on. Yeah.
Learning walks, they need to be extremely well planned. So it would involve a lot of pre-planning and discussion, and it would have to be done in such a respectful way to make them successful. Learning walks could fail miserably, in my opinion. I agree with you, Cameron. If they're not, you know, done properly, it could actually be detrimental, especially for beginning teachers. And in the mentoring beginning teacher workshops, when we're training our mentors, we talk a lot about, you know, we have templates with questions and plans and everything about, you know, exactly what it would involve, and even down to asking if a teacher agrees to, you know, have learning walks as part of their practice. Because it should be a decision, you know, it shouldn't be something that I think they're forced to do. You know, you really need to scaffold what it's going to look like. But I think if it's done well, it can be really helpful. Tiffany's saying video coaching works well for us. So is that where you use a swivel? You know, the camera and the room.
So how it works is there might be a particular skill that someone's working on, and it's usually around interactions, and it might be an aspect of interactions. And there's a framework of what that interaction, you know, what the highlights of that interaction might look like. So the person knows what the framework looks like. They agree that they want to be videoed on their performance around that skill. It might be around, you know, giving descriptive praise to children. So they'll agree to be videoed, and then they will look back at the video with the coach, and they will identify what they did well, and then they will identify what they want to improve on. So all of the power sits with the person who's being videoed, and basically the coach is really just saying, you know, what did you really like about what you did? What are the areas that you'd like to improve on? And then they're setting themselves goals. So it's a really sort of strength-based way to support their learning.
Yeah.
And it's not secret, like the framework's there.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
excellent. Love it. Sounds great. Pamela is sharing an intimidating experience that she had a while ago when leadership in the school were doing learning walks. Yeah, it can be very intimidating, Pamela, if it's not scaffolded properly. Right, thank you so much for sharing, everyone. There's some really good points there. Honestly, every time I come to this class, I learn so much. It's fabulous. All right, so as noted in this week's readings, early childhood curriculum documents, they place a strong emphasis on the importance of critical reflection. So, and we talked about this last week as well in terms of your action plan. So, critical reflection can be focused on a long-term issue, which may require ongoing research, and professional development, or it might involve more spontaneous events and interactions. So it can be discussed and evaluated at a later time. You might want to reflect on current research or something, but it doesn't have to be long term. It can be short term as well, as can your action plans. So ongoing professional development and understanding of current critical issues and research is fundamental to early childhood education and care. And I think that's why there is such a focus on it in many of your schools. It sounds like it is a big part of your practice. So another area that I wanted to touch on is, central to a teacher's strong professional self, so their identity, is the promotion of discussion that shapes your professionalism. And I guess in doing so, advocating for quality care and education of children. So Fenwick proposed that this perspective extends thinking about professional practice to include things like activism, so based on collaborative action with your peers, critical reflection, and equity and social justice issues as well. So the supporting young children's rights statement, so the statement of intent, it was developed by Early Childhood Australia. So this was in conjunction with the Australian Human Rights Commission. So we can see the key 5 themes there, and they're a guide to how early childhood professionals can actively advocate for children's rights. And it's very much, again, going back to what we were talking about when we were breaking down the Reggio approach as well. So the right to be heard, freedom from violence, abuse and neglect, the opportunity to thrive, engage civics and citizenship, action and accountability. So these are, what we were talking about. I've lost track of weeks now, not last week, the week before. So again, we're getting back to that ethical and social justice issues as well need to be considered. All right, so to develop our culture of inquiry that we've all agreed is so significant in our teaching environments, to embed critical thinking in our daily practice, we need approaches such as those on the slide, and many of those we have already discussed. So trust and collegiality, so that educators feel able to talk about their concerns and the challenges that they face, which respect for different viewpoints and understandings, opportunities during our busy teaching and planning schedules for all educators to join in the discussion. So, this is a commitment at both the individual, but also, as we've discussed as well, at that organisational level as well. and the time for reflection and to develop skills in a range of approaches to reflective practice. So, it could involve things like journal writing or critical conversation groups, or as we discussed, the sharing circles. Was it Tiffany? What was it? The learning
circles.
learning circles, yeah. So, and that commitment to ongoing professional development, and also engaging in research opportunities as well, which I think as teachers progress in their career, and sometimes you may feel a little bit stale having those sorts of research interests, when we get specific areas that we're really interested in. My daughter is actually starting, she's doing education now, and I said to her that, at times she seems very, very motivated, and other times she's less so with her studies. But I said to her that, as a teacher, we often have specific areas that we're really interested in. And I said, is there a specific area that you want to focus on? And, this is the same for teachers as well. If there are specific areas that we want to focus our critical reflections on beyond the classroom, and I guess those of you now that are doing postgraduate studies have made a commitment to that in a sense as well. So, again, these may be considerations relevant to your action plan if you did want to think about those critical conversation groups or learning circles, those sorts of things. So it's all about, I guess, thinking out of the box in some ways to make sure that you do have processes that suit your specific context. So your action plan, it would be good if you could consider it at some point in the future for those of you that are teaching. So to try and make it suited as much to your context as possible would be good. So Bredesen, again, the Designs for Learning, a new architecture for professional development in schools. It's an oldie but a goodie, so a document regarded as pivotal and seminal research in this area of professional development. So it's from 2002, but still very relevant. So very much advising that professional development needs to be strategically planned, and we've had this conversation before. That it needs to be planned based on goals. He also suggests that we need to rethink our perceptions of professional development. So not one-off isolated experiences, but, he says in work, at work, and beyond work. So part of facilitated conversations with your colleagues. So as I think Sharon mentioned, or Tiffany as well, I think that, when you do go to professional development, then you come back and it's broken down, and you talk about how some of the strategies might be able to be implemented into your program. So what does professional development currently involve in your settings? Those of you that are teaching, what does it look like? Any thoughts? Attending me, rare and in-service modules and training. Yeah. Attending meetings and sessions out of work hours, says Fiona. Yeah. Is this professional development? Cameron says it's linked to school priorities. Excellent. So is professional development in your settings, is that something that you need to pay for yourself, or is that part of the budget in your schools? COVID has meant a lot of school-based work, usually headed up by a school leader. Yeah. Learning hub engagement, memberships to professional organisations, readings. Yeah. COVID has meant a lot of changes to professional development, hasn't it? A lot more online workshops and pods and things, even conferences going online now. Warren says self-financed as company believes that they provide sufficient PD modules. Interesting. Budgeted for staff. We tentatively budget $1,000 per staff member each year. Oh, ka-ching. Nice. Wow, that's pretty good. Is that a state school, Cameron? Oh, nice. Guess different schools have different priorities, don't they? Choices to go on PD, which are linked to students' diversity in classrooms. For example, student with hearing impairment, teacher goes to hearing impairment PD. Excellent, that's great to hear too, Jade. So making sure that teachers have the skills to support individual students. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So it's really good. You get to link up what the class you're going to have, and preferably before you have that class, like the year before in the last term, you'll get to go on professional developments to prepare you.
Excellent.
But sometimes it doesn't happen till, you know, term 1, term 2, because
Yeah.
a lot of the professional development seems to be in term 1. So, yeah.
Wonder why that is.
I don't know, it just is the way it is, because I'm a supply teacher now for the school that I used to work at. So I get a lot of work in term 1 covering people who are going away for professional development sessions.
Okay, that's interesting. Pamela saying, I just actually wrote a research proposal for a micro unit on practitioner engaged inquiry, where I had to look at AITSL document about professional learning for relief teachers. As I'm only working part-time across 3 different schools doing relief, this is a pet project of mine, as relief teachers miss out and have to look out for themselves. Hence my postgraduate study. Oh, that's really interesting. We don't think about, you know, like yourself, Jade, I guess if you are doing casual kind of work, that I guess in terms of PD, you can slip through the gaps, and it would be, is it up to yourselves to organize that? It's not part of, you're not considered as part of the I guess the core teachers in the school.
I think it's actually, it's funny when you want to talk about making your studies relevant. When I wrote this, because I just submitted it very recently, and I thought, I should actually speak to the leadership at the schools that I work at, because especially if there's on-site PD, there shouldn't be any major like extra expense incurred just inviting your regular relief staff to attend that. And there are, if you look at the document, there's, I think it's 59% of relief teachers, according to this research, are never included in any PD at any of the schools they teach at. But that means there is another certain percentage that are, and under certain conditions. But yeah, it was a very interesting paper to read. And it motivated me to see, oh, how can I practically actually do something where I am at? Because if you don't ask, you won't receive.
Well, I guess that's a good point. Maybe relief teachers, some of them don't ask.
So I shall ask. It's on the to-do list.
To ask. So Katie says that she's in the same boat. I've been relief teaching for the last year and have to find my own PD to do. Yeah, no one, and Jade says no one seems to check to see if we have had PD hours. That's interesting. And also that she can attend PD on site at the school I work at though. So this last year and last year, I've just used my master's professional learning for PD hours. Okay, that's cool. Excellent. Okay, so we've talked a lot about PD, but if QCT audits us, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So we've talked ongoing registration for ECTs requires 20 hours of PD in Victoria. Yeah, what is it in Queensland now? Is it 20 hours as well? So
Yeah,
is it national?
it's 20 hours. I think it's a national standard.
Mm, yeah, interesting. Yeah, 20 hours.
It's not enough.
No, it's not much at all, really, is it?
No.
And what does that even give you? And depending on what, some of them are sort of set modules as well. Yeah, masters is much more than that. So we've talked a lot about professional development, and there are lots and lots of references at the end as well. So when you're, you really, as I said, you need to think out of the box, but I really want you to start to talk not just about what professional development you're doing, but you can talk about the importance of professional development in your particular context as well. So we're going to go through now, sort of unpacking the assessment task in a bit more detail now that you've all gotten over the first one, and hopefully you will have looked at the assessment task sheet in more detail than you had last week, and also the criteria sheet as well. So so your rationale section that you did in your first assessment task, that's going to lead in to your action plan. And this is going to involve thinking about your chosen focus and developing a plan of action to move forward. So this is in implementing some of the implications that you put forward in your essay for your particular context. Again, headings are suggested to guide you, and word count as well. So this is loose. It's just an example. So the first heading, if you want to grab your task sheets, if you've got it there, the first heading in part B, let's look at part B. Look at part A. No, we'll look on the wrong page. See, we'll look at part A. So the first, the assessment task has two parts, as you can see. So part A is a succinct rationale where you're going to reiterate your focus area, its significance to you, and how your teaching journey has shaped your understandings around this. So around your chosen focus. So it's all has to come back. You have to keep on coming back to your focus. And that was something that I noticed that some of you didn't do. So you kind of came back to it in your findings, but in any of your assessment tasks, in any of your units with your, essay writing, always come back to the focus. I'm just going through this PhD that I'm marking at the moment, and it feels like every sort of section, well, she does, in every section, she comes back to her focus and builds on it as well. So coming back to a focus in particular areas, and this is what you need to do here. So in your rationale, in your life history, in your professional history, in your personal practice, professional goals, and personal ambition, keep on coming back to that central question. So so that first part reflects on where you've come from. So your life history, the elements that have shaped your professional understandings, and the significance of that focus area. So it could be things like your age, your gender, your culture, and your educational experience. The second section, it asks you to reflect on your professional history. So what led you to the teaching profession? You could talk about your working life as a teacher, or if you're not a teacher, if it's relevant, you could talk about your work life as well, your teaching context, if this is applicable, so break that down, teaching roles, your age group, experiences over different age groups as well, and how this professional history has shaped your evolving pedagogical beliefs. So it could be your pedagogical beliefs and your approaches to curriculum, specifically in relation to your chosen research question. So again, coming back to that research question all the time. So the third section is around your personal understandings of practice. So emerging teaching goals, your future ambitions, again, around your focus area. It's actually suggested that you focus on 3 key areas that came out of the analysis of your scholarly research and curriculum documents in your first assessment task. Some of you, I may have suggested that you rewrite some of the sections. If you didn't use recent research, or the research wasn't appropriate possibly, or it wasn't connected appropriately to your research questions. So, if you are concerned, I would suggest a bit of a rewrite with that literature section, if I have suggested that, just so that you've got something to base that section on. So it suggests highlight 2 to 3 pivotal ideas. So it would be around curriculum and pedagogy. Any questions at this point about that? So this first section, it's very personal. It's about you. It really is talking about how you came to where you are now. And again, it doesn't necessarily have to be, if you're not a practicing teacher at the moment, it doesn't necessarily have to be about, you're obviously doing this course, you've chosen to do this course in this unit for a reason. So I guess it will be based around that. What led you here? Any questions? Okay, so part B. So again, we've got 1125 to 1250 words. So not including references. You've made that quite clear now. So the first heading, context. So ask for a description of the educational context you're currently teaching in or plan to teach in. So some of you are actually, those of you that aren't teaching are thinking about a future teaching context and what that might look at. So to help you actually go through and do the action plan, I would actually make up a teaching context. So think about your ideal context to work in the future. In the ideal world, when you finished your master's or even prior to that, somewhere that you might like to teach a particular context. Again, that's relevant to your research question. So that research question is central. That's why I asked you to move backwards. So to start, look at what you have to do for the second assessment task and move backwards to a certain extent. So you would be, the age group, the type of setting, be brief and fairly succinct with this. It states on the task sheet that it must be in the birth to 8 years, but because I want this to be authentic and something that you can actually implement if you are teaching, if you're in upper primary or secondary, I am very happy for you to use your actual context. But it's very important that you emphasize that you are applying early childhood principles. That needs to come through. So early childhood principles and approaches. So this needs to be outlined in your essay. You know, so drawing on early childhood research. Because as I said, I want it to be authentic for you. And that goes for those of you that may not be working at the moment, but have worked in a secondary context. You can think of the context that you were working in and apply early childhood education principles to that, if it helps you, if it makes it easier for you than making up an environment. I want it to be as easy for you as possible. And I really do encourage those of you who are not working in a teaching context at the moment, if you are having trouble, I've had a few email conversations supporting students through that as well. So please contact me. Don't sit there struggling. Make sure you contact me, because I'm very happy to support you. And there's always a way. There's always a way to make it relevant to your assessment task. So the second heading, we've got issue and key concepts. So implications that you will need to action. So the aims of your plan and why you've chosen these actions. So you'll need to reference these understandings. So this is, you know, you would need to evidence your engagement with relevant unit readings and weekly discussions, you know, and definitely making links back to the research that you unpacked in your first assessment task. You know, if you're looking to do very well in the assessment task, you also might to include what indicators of success might look like in implementing this. And as I said, what might be involved in evaluating as well. So that may not actually be a detailed part of the assessment task, but I think in terms of, you know, the criteria, making sure that it's a deep understanding, you know, we're always considering that evaluation and indicators of success are really important in planning anything in education. So you may want to consider that. And finally, the action plan. As we've discussed, there is an example, the template, that you can use that if you want to. Or for those of you who complete professional development plans in your teaching settings, you're welcome to expand on these, as long as it includes those dot points that are on the assessment task. So timeframe, rationale, links to curriculum and pedagogy, professional growth and critical reflection activities, resources and limitations. So, you know, you may want to add on to that if you wanted to as well, evaluation, if that's what you want to do. You could, you know, be thinking about, you know, critical thinking strategies and limitations and things that we touched on earlier. You know, you would definitely be thinking about those contextual considerations. They may be limitations, or they may actually be something positive as well to do with your context. And, you know, again, make sure that you refer to last week's readings, this week's readings as well. On the end of the workshop slides, you'll find all of the references that I refer to. You can reference the weekly readings as well. Any questions at all? I'm sure you're going to have them as you go through the assessment task. And as always, I encourage you to email me.
I have a question, please, Angela.
Yes, Tiffany?
I am wondering, like, the second assignment seems really practical and personal, and I'm just kind of wondering how much theory is expected in this one. I'm not really sure.
I think I always say to students, when you're doing a task like this, so where you would be using I statements, you would be referencing any statements that are not your own.
Okay.
But as I said, I need to see your understanding about professional development. I need to see you bringing in your prior knowledge, your new knowledge from your first assessment task. So you would be using the same references that you used in that. So you'd be citing the studies. So this is the new knowledge. This is why, and you know, what I found out and what I'm going to do with this new knowledge is.
And that would be throughout the document.
Yeah, throughout the document. Yeah.
Okay.
Good question. Good question. So it says that you're encouraged to write in a mixture of first and third person using statements such as I think and in my experience for your own opinions. And then, for example, Smith's 2010 research into literacy learning suggests that for referring to the writing of, you know, when you're referring to the writing of others. So a mixture of first and third person. Yep. Check in the chat. Nothing at this point. So, you know, we really are requiring deep thinking and critical reflection around professional development. You know, I want you to be mentioning the sorts of things that we talked about in the workshop today. So acknowledging the importance of critical reflection in supporting your ongoing learning. You know, I really want to see that evidence that you've critically engaged in the unit readings, probably even more so than in the last assessment task. So that was more focused on your specific research, but we've really talked a lot about, you know, communities of practice and, you know, inquiry processes and cultures of learning. We've talked about, you know, things like building resilience and all that sort of stuff as part of your action plan as well. So you really need to think critically about what you're doing and, you know, supporting any statements that aren't your own with what we've actually engaged in with the unit. You're not really going to need to go any further than the unit readings in this particular assessment task beyond what you've done in your first assessment task. So unpacking that literature and of course the curriculum documents as well. Might want to bring in the ethics as well, as I said. Yeah. Check in the chat. Any further questions? No. So if we have a look, so it's due Sunday, June the 6th at 11:59, 2,500 words, not including references. And so the action plan table is included in the word count. So if you are finding that, you know, you're over the word count, and I'm happy for you to use dot points and short phrases. You know, you don't have to have fully formed sentences in the table, because it is a table. So something similar to what you would do for your own performance plans at school. So predominantly in first person, as I said, with third as well, will need to be succinct, and you would cite your first assignment when referring to your implications. Some of you might need to rewrite your implications section if you haven't mentioned implications for your personal practice. Maybe just even do that as an exercise, just to assist with your understandings and help. It could even be the basis or the structure of your action plan as well. So I know some of you didn't mention, a lot of you went into a great deal of wonderful detail about implications for lots of different stakeholders and also for the profession, but you also need to refer to your action plan. But I took that into consideration as well. Okay. All right, so, just as an example of questions, on the final slide, lots and lots of references here that I've referred to in the workshop. Some of them are references that we've referred to in the reading for this week as well. Any questions? You're all very quiet now.
Oh, sorry, Angela. Yeah, I mentioned that you said the action plan table. So should we did the action plans in the required formats such as the table or something? We can do this.
So on Blackboard, there's actually an example of an action of the table that you might want to use. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it's a guide. It's a template, and you can use your own if that's what. But if you're not familiar with that kind of template, you can use that one. Who here already has a template that you use at work for that kind of? You probably do. A lot of you would. Yeah, and so I'm happy for you to adapt that. Yeah. And so that is included in your word count, the table. But as I said, you can just do dot points in the table if you wish.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. A question. If we have to rewrite our implications, do we submit that to you? No. So I don't actually have to see your first assignment again, or just explain how. No, you don't even have to explain how you've extended it, because really it's for your benefit doing your implications again. You don't have to submit it. It's just for you to develop, and to start really thinking about your implications for practice. So a lot of you, as I've said, did detailed implications for the profession and different stakeholders, but just transfer that into what it would be for your particular context. If we do a mind map and take a photo of it, how is that included in the word count? Ooh. Fiona, do you want to expand on that? I love mind maps.
I'm just a bit visual, so I would tend to do, some colours and some doodles, because I'd probably get distracted doing something.
Yeah, you won't.
But then if I'm taking a photo of it,
yeah, just sometimes it's.
So really, I just say, and the mind map is 16 words or whatever, be more than that, but
Yeah, just consider that in, but be very, very careful, because with Turnitin, sometimes it doesn't recognize things that are embedded into the document, so you have to be really careful about that.
It doesn't bode well for another assignment I had to do where I had to include a photo of something, but never mind, that just adds to my anxiety. That? Thank you for that.
Have you submitted that yet?
Yeah.
Oh, well, if it worked, it worked. That's
fine. Phew, that's okay.
Yeah, you would have heard from Did everyone have to submit a photo? Or is that just what you did?
No, I think we had to submit a photo.
No, that's
Yeah.
fine. I
Okay.
think it just depends, because I some students in another unit, the requirement of the task was that they had to do a mind map, and some of them went and found, you know, these obscure ones to create mind maps, and you know, it was a PDF, and then they had to turn it into something else, and some of them came back with, you know, these tiny images that we couldn't see, but of course I downloaded it and just expanded it and it was fine. So that's not an issue. But if ever there are any problems with your submissions, when I look at them, I will definitely contact you and say there's something's gone wrong. We need to adjust that and you can submit it again. You know, I'm happy with that. That's not a problem.
Thank you.
I definitely talk to you about it, Fiona. I wouldn't just say, oh, bad luck, you get a 0. Okay, good question though. Anything else? No. All right, well, we might finish up. My stomach is grumbling and I know I have a nice fish curry up there waiting for me. As long as my son has remembered to put it in the fridge rather than leaving it out for an hour and a half, that would be very, very frustrating. All right, any further questions before we finish up?
I've got a quick question, but it's probably only related to me. Like, I don't think it's everybody question.
You would be surprised to
Okay.
Out with it.
Well, in my first assessment, I sort of said that I had a two-pronged approach to the professional development. Like, there was some things I wanted to learn around children, and then there was some things that I wanted to learn around supporting educators to learn about children.
Yeah.
So is it okay if I talk about both of those things in the assessment?
Definitely, because remember last week and on Blackboard, I think we said, you know, have you got a short-term plan or a long-term plan, or is it a combination of two? So, you know, it's so individual. This is why we haven't got any examples up there on Blackboard, because I don't want you to look at it. And this is what happened with the previous example as well. You know, they're just examples, but you know, yours could look completely different. Everyone does things differently, and especially with this, it's going to be very much dependent on, you know, as Fiona said, she's very visual. She's going to use a mind map, and I'm happy with that. That's fabulous.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, it's up to you, but definitely think about those short-term and long-term aspects of it. Okay. All right. Well, if that's everyone, we might finish off, and I will see you all next week. Make sure you contact me if you have any questions.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank
Have a lovely
you.
evening.
Bye.